which just speaks upon the age-old topic of life will keep bringing you the same lesson until you fucking learn it. And life at every moment is coming to meet you at exactly where you're meeting it. If I'm meeting it with negativity and fear and self-hate and everything, it's always working in our favor, this existence, life. But that liberated me, and that literally freed me and gave me clarity on life. The things I began to understand, the things I began to see clearly, having gone inward. We all have to try and get things from the outside world, whether it be money, relationship, house, this fulfillment, to try and fill this thing we all have, and it's never fulfilled.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Unfold with me, your host, Larissa. I am so happy that you're here, ready to unfold all the layers, to reconnect with our true self. Today's episode is going to be very vulnerable and raw, and I'm talking to all the men out there. So this episode is for you. I know that so many men grew up with the belief that being strong means keeping everything together, not sharing your true emotions. But what if you can actually learn that vulnerability doesn't mean that it takes away the strength? What if you can learn to open up and to still be strong? And this is why I'm so happy and so grateful to have today a guest with me here in the podcast. His name is Josh, and he inspired me so much with his story, where he told me that he felt for so many years disconnected, and he started to reconnect with himself. He was going to Thailand for 3 months, no phone, just himself with a bunch of strangers, and with his feelings he's been avoiding for so many years. So Josh's story is an example that opening up doesn't mean that you're gonna lose anything. And with that, I am so ready for today's episode. I want to welcome Josh to the podcast Unfold. Josh, welcome to the podcast. And I'm feeling so honored that you said yes to it, that you said yes to sharing your story, because I know it takes a lot of courage. And I really believe that it can help so many people out there. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm honored to be here and that you were touched and interested enough to ask me. So, yeah, I mean, it's funnily enough something that I was actually sitting with wanting to do, finding an outlet for me to be able to speak to people and share through my own experience to be of service or be of value to others. So, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Josh, let's start from the beginning. How would you describe the connection with your younger self? How would you describe yourself when you look back to the younger Josh? How was your relationship with yourself back then? For example, how was your daily self-talk? And another question is also, which I'm curious, do you think that anyone else saw how you were truly feeling at this time?
I guess it depends how far back I go. I mean, my earlier years, when I was quite young, I was a happy kid. I used to play sports of all kinds and, friend groups and everything. This is in the beginning of my very, very early years, but I suppose difficulty began as a result of home environment issues, which came from my parents' divorce. And that gradually built up over time from maybe like the age of 4 or 5, which is where it began, and then just kind of building up as I grew older. Obviously that was not something I've come to terms with and realized very recently is how not easy that was for me as a child, even though I was not aware of actually its intensity and its the extremity of how much it was affecting me when I was actually in that. So that kind of grew and worsened over time and kind of had a bit of a divide between my families. And Yeah, I think I've said this to you before in the first conversation I had with you. It was, I think, somewhere around those years that unknowingly I had learned how I learned this trait and developed this trait of kind of disregarding my own feelings and instead adopting this very intense concern for those around me and those that I cared about. So that began with my parents, where, as I said, I wasn't even aware of it, but I learned to develop this trait of it's about them, it's not about me. But it came from a place of love. I realized, I love my parents more than anything. This was the essence of them, and their presence was my home, was my love, was my family. And because ever since I was a child, my state of empathy and love was so heightened, something within me took that decision, even unknowingly, that, okay, like I'm so worried and I care about them so much, I'm not even giving any attention or focus onto what I am feeling. So I come to learn now that that's where it began. And obviously, as you might imagine, as I grew older, that seed began to grow into something much deeper and more difficult as I grew into a teenager and then adulthood, which, you can already imagine where that may go. People pleasing and always being concerned for other people and never looking inward at yourself and all these things. So your question being my memory of relationship with my younger self, as I said, when it was in my very early years, it was good. And then I would say approaching my beginning of my teens is when it began to go very downhill. And I guess all those years of having been so concerned with the difficulty that was happening outside of me, I've said this before, like my ability to feel empathy for people ever since I was a young boy was extremely intense, like to the point that I would be overcome with emotion very easily. I used to cry quite easily as a child. You could say, in a sense, I had quite an intense, I'm not too sure what the best way to describe it is, but you could say I had like a more intense kind of femininity in the energy, but not in that I was feminine in my actings, but that my emotions were quite high and there was a more sensitivity and these things.
Can I interrupt you here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for everyone who's listening now, Josh and I, we already had deep conversations, and we realized that as soon as we start to talk, we can go very deep. So that's why I'm like interrupting in just whenever I have a question. You said that you were crying or you were crying faster maybe than someone else. How did were you crying in front of your parents, for example? Or how did people react? Were you crying for yourself in your room or?
Good question. Yeah. In the earlier years, like approaching 10 years old and then into my teens, yes, of course, in front of my parents, I would have many moments where I would cry. Now, the divide between my parents then changed them drastically in their own individual ways, and my relationship with them too. My father being quite, having all his own things, and my mother having all her own things. And my relationship with my mother kind of dissipated as I began growing towards my teens, and I was much more around my father, who always did his best, always was there as presently as he could be. He encouraged, my own kind of interests and expression. So he was always, he did the best he could in those ways. But there was a difficulty that he always had in being able to actually relate to how sensitive I was actually. And his sense of energy, even his way of loving, is quite tough. I mean, there's quite a strong, but almost sometimes could be felt as coldness, So there were many moments as I started growing where my moments of crying began to get, and yes, this happened outside of my home environment too, where I may be getting emotional, or it could be something as me being with friends, and the way I would care for people, I would get given the classic, which is, Josh, you're wearing your heart on your sleeve, or you're too sensitive, or you're too emotional, or you care too much. Don't do this, don't do that. Be more cold, show less interest.
Who told you that?
Friends, and as I started beginning to have interest in, like women and things like that. So But yes, I do recall, like, maybe specifically more around my father. It was like I would, for example, maybe in the moments where his voice would be raised quite intensely, and my sensitivity, maybe I would be feeling quite an intense fear and anxiety around that. And start to get emotional, maybe start to cry. And what it was met with, even though it was, I choose to believe it was not intentional on his part, meaning he doesn't mean to meet his son with aggression in a vulnerable moment, but that's the way it was received by me, meaning my vulnerable kind of emotional moments, I began to almost learn slowly, like, to hide them, because they weren't being held as I maybe would have hoped in those moments, or I was, feeling that it was being met with aggression and that this was wrong. It was wrong for me to be so emotional in these moments. Maybe something was wrong with me.
What would you have hoped how someone would have reacted?
I mean, as I said, these conversations that I have are quite particular, in that I'm almost looking back on the life of someone that I very much now feel like it's a different person, like someone that I no longer... It's a strange feeling for me. This is a much deeper conversation to have, but now looking back, obviously I know that I would have hoped that it's met with the same sensitivity, with the understanding, with a calm approach, with a, it's a child at the end of the day, a young boy, and emotions are still kind of all over the place and things like that. So once again, I understand now, being a man, that my father met me in that way because he had so many of his own difficulties. And I'm able to sympathize and relate with that very much so. In a way, I'm very grateful that I'm able to. So, as I said, these things to look back on are difficult in those ways, because I know what I would have hoped I was met with, but I also know why it couldn't have been met with it in that moment, because of his own dealings and difficulties. And yeah.
Did anyone saw how you truly felt? Do you had the feeling that some people truly saw your struggles?
I mean, within my home environment, yes. I mean, my father, as much as I'm saying and speaking up on these things, he obviously saw very clearly, especially as I got into my teen years, how much was wrong, in how much I was struggling mentally and then emotionally, and then, having left school and all these things. But right into my mid-teens, 15 years old, I did develop a very intense ability to hide everything. So no, not much was being seen outside of, like, Josh being the kind of, well, at that point, kind of becoming the fat kid, but even, like, just kind of maybe not having much energy, having more of, like, a sad expression on his face. But the details of what I was going through, no. Because I never went out of my way to tell anyone about that. I always, that's when my isolation and insecurity began, and that's when I started fully developing this ability of, like, just push everything down and hide everything away. And that actually heightened so much that it wasn't even just the insides that I hid away. I hid so much away in here that then I felt I couldn't do anything but hide this too. So I hid away physically. So yeah, it was just a build-up of, like, hide it. But I still always kept that concern for everyone else throughout all that. That actually grew. So it was kind of like, opposites were going. My intensity of how much I wanted to be there for others was growing. And for myself was dissipating, depleting. Until there was nothing left. So, yeah.
For how many years did you do that? Like, hiding and isolating?
Well, giving these... I'll say these things briefly because there's details and it's a long conversation, but probably around 14 or 15 is when I started really struggling in my schooling as a result of my own difficulties mentally and home environment and all these things that were stressing me out, that I really didn't even have the ability to acknowledge or know what was happening. And so 14, 15, I actually dropped out of school at the time. And once again, my parent, my father, who I was living with, didn't really know any other way to help me other than to kind of allow me to do what I told him would help. And I understand that, so dropping out was something I did, and that is when the isolation in its fullest began. That is at the age of, like, 15. That's when I, began very intense video game addiction, used to smoke marijuana every single day, began binge eating, and that actually became probably my deepest addiction, besides the video games and the marijuana. and basically just hiding away in my room because the world in these video games was safe to me, as was my bedroom, hidden away from everyone and everything. I didn't really, when you're alone in that space, even though I could be so self-sabotaging, it became a safe space, because that sense of needing to be anything in the eyes of anyone outside of my room wasn't there, because no one was seeing me, I didn't even exist. So I existed in these video games, and I had actually friends in them and people that actually meant a lot to me, because they made me feel kind of important in a video game. So as much as I know that is no way a healthy thing for a child to get into, it actually, you could say, saved my life and gave me a lot of beautiful memories that I have still to this day. When you start kind of enumerating of awesome memories you've had, there are a lot of those moments that feel that way to me. So that began, and that, I think I said this to you before, spanned over maybe 5 years of just very intense isolation, never really leaving the bedroom and just remaining in this space. And my routine had flipped totally upside down, meaning I was awake all night, asleep all day, because that gave me even more opportunity to be away from anyone, because everyone's asleep when I'm awake. And so, that remained my routine. And actually, obviously, I became deeply addicted to those things. It's all I thought about, all I wanted to do. Anytime I happened to be out of the house, my brain was only being this is the clear representation of any form of addiction. It's all you want to do, because it's relieving you from what you're suffering from. So all my mind was telling me it wanted to do was run back into isolation and sit into that chair, eat some food, smoke some weed, and play these video games, and just do that for hours and hours and hours and hours. Totally even rejecting the needs of my body in self-care and hygiene and keeping up with diet and movement, and just sitting in a chair for 12, 13 hours. So those were the years where I mean, those are the years also where a teenager is supposed to form the most. Those are the formative years where you're supposed to have your first relationships and your first experiences of parties and going out, social life, growing. That's when you go from I really believe being a child, and then you're starting to kind of slowly get into the beginnings of adulthood, through your experiences. And that was almost, I think I said this to you in the last conversation, it was almost like I was stuck in time, you could say. The whole world around me was moving on and people having experiences, but I was literally stuck in time, meaning from this point of 15 all the way approaching 20, it's almost like no time passed, because I'm still in that room doing the same thing with the same outlook on myself and everything.
Okay, so just that I understand right, were you feeling numb and empty at this time?
I would kind of be inclined to saying I felt numb and empty, but I also realized I still felt a lot, but my ability from having been young and being able to feel all these kind of beautiful things for, the empathy and everything. Now, to have empathy for people, you need to be around people. So I take that out of the picture. I'm no longer around people. Suddenly that empathy kind of goes and hides away somewhere within myself that I no longer even know it's there. So maybe I thought it was gone. And suddenly in its absence, started to come this very dark sense towards myself, the relationship with myself, self-hate and insecurity and absolute lack of confidence, or literally nothing that I liked about myself. So it was almost like the absence of the truest part of myself, which I really realized is that empathy I always had, and that compassion and that love for people, because it couldn't be fed and given energy and attention. Out of its absence came its opposite, which was hate towards myself. There was no one else to hate. It was just me with me. And the reason it was me with me is because I hated myself so much that I didn't want the world to see me. So I still kept myself in that place. And even though I wasn't aware of it, it was a breeding ground for a very dark sense towards myself, hate. And that grew and grew and grew to very, very dark places where, you kind of start thinking about all these dark thoughts of ending your own life as well. I've had those moments. So yes, I can see clearly now, having done all the work I've done and having a very deep understanding of myself and many, many other topics and things, I know why things happen now. So it was the absence of that real true nature of myself that needed that attention so that it could grow and flourish and blossom. And in its absence came its opposite, So, yeah.
Did you felt that in this time? That something was missing? Did you felt that your true nature is missing?
I mean, I guess I was denying it, avoiding it, not even really wanting to look at it. I was giving, once again, what you feed grows. What I give my attention to is literally what is growing in its manifestation within my life. So if I'm giving all my attention to the negativity and the darkness, only that is growing, and I'm literally just kind of totally forgetting about what was and what I had. Even though it was still there, I just kind of totally ignored it. And, you know, through like self-hate and the insecurity, it became something I was very heavily judging, meaning thinking it was something wrong. Like, I should not be so sensitive. I should not be so emotional. I shouldn't feel this way. I should show lack of interest towards things and this and that. So I started, once again, like telling myself all these things about me weren't supposed to be there. They needed to be changed or removed or killed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You already said something, and I want to come back then to this point where we're going to start to talk about your self journey and why you are here today where you are, what made you to this person who you are today, and why you're sitting today in front of me talking about this so clearly, which is impressive. But you also talked about hiding your true nature, hiding your feelings. And I know from lots of conversations I had with men that it's so common.
Yeah.
It's so common for men, also for women, but for men, I would say even more. Showing yourself vulnerable is seen as weak.
Yeah.
Being strong means keeping it inside, holding it together, not crying. Really, I have to say, I hate this that people see crying as weak. I cry so many times and I don't feel weak, but the point is, why do you think, or where do you think does this comes from? Where do you think does this comes from that so many men are struggling with showing their emotions, with having this thought of, I have to be strong, and being strong means keeping it inside? Where does it comes from?
I mean, I have many answers to many things when I get asked questions, but I obviously can't speak exactly and directly on any other man's individual experience. Everyone has such different, unique experiences that led them to be certain ways that they became. But I can't really speak directly on that. I mean, I know from my own.
Yeah, what do
there's
you think?
There's many things I could guess that, you know, for the majority, I mean, just in the society we live in, and just as a common denominator within the male experience, through the first relationships, which is always a huge one for both men and women, like the most suffering more than not tends to come from relationship aspects, you know. And that's totally understandable, because that is the biggest depth of connection you can have with someone. So once again, the correspondence between, you know, if that depth to love is there, then the depth to suffer and fall apart is also there. So I think, yes, maybe just that, once again, total unknown programming happening towards men through society, in that, you know, maybe this heightened sense of they're not supposed to be emotional, and they're supposed to be tough and strong and providers, and even just, you know, the kind of totally delusional outlook put towards what is attractive within a man, you know. And maybe many young boys feeling that that's not something that a young girl would be attracted to, sensitivity and emotional intelligence and all this shit, you know. No, it's like just how pretty is he, how handsome is he, or how much does he have, or what can he give, all these things. That's majority of the time. I mean, I also know from the experiences and the people I've met, like taking out the male and female factor, it really, yes, you're totally right in saying there's a majority, meaning I would totally agree that there is a much higher majority of the population being male that learns this thing of not showing emotion and hiding it away. Because I know and believe that women, from a very natural standpoint, they have a much higher running emotional intelligence. They're more in tune with their emotions, and something within them naturally pushes them towards the direction of give attention to, whereas something in the man almost pulls them into take the attention away, you know, like, just fuck that shit, That's how even men amongst men, which is something that I started having absolutely no experience of towards like my year 20, probably actually into the beginning of my 20s, like presence of having male friends was something that started almost coming to zero for me. Because, as I said, I felt like, especially amongst males, I felt very, very oddly out, like the odd one out. Because I did not see women the way that they saw them. I did not feel about my emotions the way that they did. I did not really want to do the things in the ways that they claimed I should and that they did. So slowly, even though I tried for so many years to kind of mold myself into that I would fit in, something within me definitely knew it couldn't and that it wasn't meant to. And actually, fast forwarding all these years into this point of my life, more often than not, I do resonate and I'm able to communicate with women better than men. And the men that I am able to deeply connect with and have a very close love and relationship for are very deeply sensitive men. Ones that other men may deem weird and strange and over the top and, the odd one out. I've always been gravitated to those men because I understand them and because I see a reflection of my past self, and I'm not at all using those words towards them. I believe that they are the embodiment of what masculinity should be, and authenticity. You're not supposed to shall we all just fall in line and conform and be like one big army of fucking numb men, No. So there's no fun in that. And I don't, once again, the opposite of courage is conformity. Meaning, is everyone going to fall in line and be the same, and let's just all be a flock of sheep and just either be numb or be this, or just do what you're told, So what is courageous, and this is obviously the topic that we're getting into, is taking that step into what is most difficult, and also adopting and embodying your complete authenticity. In whatever it may be, you want to fucking, who cares what anyone else's outlook is on yourself? To you, you know that whatever may be seen and deemed as weird or strange, to you is your most real self. And this is all just a perception and an assumption of people outside of yourself, which once you come to a certain point, you have absolutely no interest in. And actually being able to go the other way and accept that authenticity and that craziness and that strangeness begins to reflect into the outside world, and you begin to get met with people that are actually interested in your strangeness and your weirdness, and because they see how much you accept it. It's all energy at the end of the day. Reality is energy.
How was it when you were trying to fit in, but you realized, there is actually something in me that doesn't really want to fit in? Because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, who am I and in which group do I fit in? And then they feel maybe tension or whatever it is. So how did your relationships, friendships, or maybe also romantic relationships then in the future, how did they look like when you weren't really your true self? How did your relationship within yourself, like the unstable relationship, how did it affected the relationship with others?
Well, it's obviously, it didn't really affect, it destroyed relationships with other people, to be honest. And as I mentioned before, my years where I should have been having most of those, I was having none of those. So all my own experiences that everyone has came much, much later. Now, I'm a big believer now at this point in my life, everyone is on their own timeline. There's no such thing as you're late or you're early. You're exactly where you're meant to be on the perfect timeline for your own self. But I also realized, compared to the majority of men, women, whatever, I was very much late. It could be anything, my first relationship, or even having my first group of friends, my first experiences of sexual interactions, anything, my own emotion and everything, even just being part of the outside world came literally in my early 20s. So, and not in ways that I was the one actually cultivating these relationships. For example, towards my 20s, when I had made that decision to something, I can't even recall exactly what within me made the decision to step out of that cave and suddenly try and fight towards life. I really honestly can't even recall what it was. I just know that something must have in me decided that. I do recall that it didn't come from a healthy place, meaning it wasn't like I suddenly woke up and I was filled with self-belief and I decided, I can do this. It was because I had begun to have my first experiences of what other people my age were really experiencing at that age and how they were going about their lives. And I realized that once again, it was really just a heightened expression of all that negative, dark stuff I had cultivated in that room. And then when I stepped out, what it saw was, okay, I'm everything they are is everything that I'm not. So it's time to fucking go to work, something within me said, which is great, okay, but it came from a terrible place, it was from a place of self-hate. Once again, it was like deeming myself to be not worthy at all of everything I should be, which is what everyone out there is. So once again, here comes the war towards trying to fit in. So yeah, when I started from whatever age it was, 19, 20, in my bathroom every single night, twice a day, working out with a pair of sand-filled dumbbells that poured fucking sand on my face every time I did a rep. And I did that for looking in the mirror, and it was not belief, it was hate. It was like just kind of hating what I saw in the mirror so much that I just kept going and going and going and going and going. And it went on for years and transformed my body, and I lost all that weight. And before I had taken any steps to do this, to lose all this weight, the only reason I was even able to have those first viewings of what was happening outside of the world is because of the one person that has countless times saved my life, which is my little sister, who I lost relationship with at a young age. We didn't really have a great relationship when we lived together, typical brother-sister fighting, like just get off my ass and annoying me. And then as a result of our own parents' things and the separation, I went with my father and she stayed with my mother. And as a young kid, you're not even thinking of these things. Our relationship just kind of dissipated, and we didn't have one. And then as I started growing and she started growing, once again, something within us both found its way back to each other. And I think she was like 16 and I was 19. And, I was morbidly obese, covered in acne. Like, I used to think of myself as a monster in a cave. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror every time I passed one. The worst thing the thing I hated most was mirrors. I hated those things. So I literally felt like from a movie, monster in a cave. And obviously my sister, even though she was not really aware of the exact details, something in her obviously saw that her brother was in so much pain. And the space I was given, funnily enough, she was already embodying her beautiful ability to hold space, which is what this woman does now for a living in the most amazing way. So something within her already knew what it was meant to travel towards, and she was doing it with me. She held the space for me to come out of this room of mine. And I guess the only reason I did that is because I felt safe enough, because it was my sister who I loved so much. So something within me was not as afraid to go out. But at the same time, it came with a lot of difficulty because I was her older brother. I was supposed to protect her. I was the one supposed to be setting an example. At least what my mind was telling me was supposed to be happening. And so I obviously felt massive embarrassment to be around her friends. And I was stepping out into the world without any basic knowledge on things that are so basic and should be happening to a human being naturally. As I said, self-care, self-hygiene, how to dress yourself, how to just look or talk, or it's almost like being born again, like coming out of this dark hole and being born again into like a time loop. Suddenly, it's 5 years later and you're stepping out. I had to really figure everything out from scratch and how to even deal with myself and what I was feeling. And I didn't know how to dress. So it was an embarrassing thing for me. But at the same time, she gave me that space. And I started to have my first friends from that, and people that I met, even though I was in a terrible state. And that gave me that space to, even though it was from a bad place, I started making these changes, losing the weight and everything. But going back to your question, even all those years later, when I had lost the weight and I began to experience how differently people approach you and treat you because you look so different. Oh, wow, like girls that never paid a second of attention to you. Wow, you look really great, and people actually coming up to you and stuff. And something with it never sat well with me, because and so I begin to look back on this with almost like something within myself did care about me. I did care about myself, even though I didn't know it at the time. Something within me knew that there was enough self-worth, even so small, that it didn't sit well with me that people were treating me differently just because I look different. And the whole point of that, I suppose, is you've asked me this question personally outside of this. I transformed my body. But fuck me, that was my greatest mask, This was the biggest mask I've ever, the best mask. Because people are so concerned with what you look like, it doesn't even pass through most people's minds to even think what's hiding behind that. So, and something in me deeply knew this. Like, if I can get as attractive as possible, as big, as buff, as kind of wanted, or people wanting me, no one's gonna know what the hell is hiding behind this big mask. I also wasn't aware of this at the time, to be honest. I was just consumed in this obsession of trying to get this validation and like how attractive can I become? Constant state of comparison,
Even if you were training so much, so hard, every time, did you felt enough?
No, never. Never, which is why it kept going so intensely and for so long and became an obsession, which is also a pattern of mine from my past. That was one of my most intense patterns, obsessiveness and just becoming extremist tendencies, going from one extreme to another extreme and diving headfirst into that, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So
why do you think this can become so, let's call it, dangerous? Because when I hear you talking about this, like putting yourself out there into the gym and everything with this obsession, when you tell me this, it seems like it wasn't really healthy. No, why do you think such a big obsession that comes out of self-hate isn't the best way? If someone starts, if it's gym, if it's looking for relationships or a business, if it gets obsessive, why is this not the right way to go? Or even right or wrong? There is not really a right or wrong, but I think you get my point, right?
No, I totally get your point. And I also know that, once again, like, even though me, just like every other human being on this planet, has their unique details to their story, once again, going back onto the male topic, I know for a fact that outside of my own personal unique story, almost all men, especially ones that step into that realm from a young age of gym and fitness, it does come from the same place, where they don't feel worthy enough and they don't feel validated enough and they want to suddenly be something, because for some it can come from a healthy place where they feel inspired by someone they saw. That's amazing, that's perfect. For a lot, it does come from a place where they feel extremely unworthy and self-hatred and all these things. I know that for a fact. So that is actually very common amongst many men. Obviously, from my own personal story, I mean, when on the topic of obsession, nothing really in life that is totally obsessed over is healthy. You need a balance in life. I mean, if we're on the topic of fitness right now, then, I mean, the body, you can't dive headfirst into training it so many times a day. And you need to give it time to rest, to heal. And this applies to so many. It doesn't even apply just to the body, to the mind, to the emotions, everything. Like, you need to have the balance, the things to meet one another. The intensity of like the working out and the recovery. It needs to come together. But I was just so focused, like get me there as fast as possible and just take me away from this as fast as possible. I just wanted to run the hell away from what I was and become this. So, and it became my mask, obviously, because it began right from the beginning. It could never be fulfilled, this journey that I stepped upon, because I was trying to simply change the external. I was trying to change how I was being seen, how I was being wanted, how I was being viewed, what I looked like, but nothing from the source was changing.
How was it then because you said girls, for example, were coming up, were like, oh, you look so amazing. People were coming up to you. How did this affected your maybe first relationship with a girl, or?
I'm gonna dive right into the dark shit, like right now.
Yeah, you know that.
No.
We never had small talk conversations. So.
No, it definitely did not go fucking well. Not at all. Did not go well. For the record, I mean, so many topics that we're speaking about, but I never did the inner work. Like, we're talking, I started my 20s, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I was still that kid in the bedroom inside, behind this heavily built body and this totally transformed exterior, which is creates even more suffering. You begin to feel like a ghost within yourself. Everyone's seeing you so differently, and you start to feel almost insane in some moments, because I feel nothing but the same as what I was. And something in you starts struggling a lot, because you're seeing me so differently. Why the fuck am I not feeling differently? Like,
How
I feel
did
the same.
people saw you?
And people would see me in ways that I was unable to see myself, which is a very common thing in humanity. Like, well, a lot of us we are unable to see ourselves as other people see us. And that applies to so many of us. To be honest, I would be inclined to believe it applies to everyone. Obviously, people were seeing a change. Like, it starts from the eyes, our reality for most people, unless you start to do a lot of inner work and you get to a certain place, reality tends to be dictated by what you're seeing. That's kind of consumption by the eyes. So if they're seeing a lot of change and a total transformation, like, in front of them, it kind of filters into their mind, and they're just like, oh wow, like, he's done so much work, achieved so much, done this, done that, must feel amazing, looks amazing, like this and that. Was not the case at all inside of me, and all those patterns and belief systems that I learned at a young age, nothing within me was going to come out and say that I felt exactly like I did, and I was still that little obese kid with no confidence or anything. So yes, then stepping into that space of my first relationship, I mean, as I said, I never did the work on myself. I never ever looked inwardly, but my attention was still totally consumed outwardly. So I did have this desire to kind of, go and seek, and look towards women and want to help. And going into the very deep topic, which I'll put in a very simple summary, in the entirety of reality is a mirror. Everything in your life is a mirror. Is it just a reflection of your inner state? And I did not know that at the time, so I was attracting and magnetizing and pulling toward me very deeply broken people. And what did I do? I found purpose in that, because this part of my people pleasing was so deeply fed that was my purpose, like, save them. It's the kind of duality and the insanity of the paradox happening within people. Like, you never put the attention into helping or saving yourself, but something in you would just fucking dive right into everyone's issues and just save them. I was not aware of the truth of what was happening at all, which just speaks upon the age-old topic of life will keep bringing you the same lesson until you fucking learn it. And the last experience of that kind that happened to me just sent me off the rails so far that it felt like an accumulation of all the past ones just came together, and it's just like the loss was on the scale of all of them. The weight of it was just all of them. So that just threw me right down into the depths, and I just crumbled into, it was literally the pain and the loss and the hatred of all those years accumulating into one experience, and that sent me down the darkest hole, which then, we've jumped quite a few years, but this is actually a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, a year and a half, I think, and that sent me down the depths of that darkness, that then led me to what you've mentioned about my time in Thailand, where I went for those 3 months.
Let's jump into this, what you said. You felt so much pain.
Yeah.
And then something started to shift within you that led you to this journey, that brought you to this journey in Thailand. What happened, and how did the beginning of this journey look like?
Well, once again, a repeated context of the same situation happening is I fell down to my depths, and honestly, at that point, saw no way out. Was actually obsessing in my mind and thinking about, the end of my own life heavily every single day. And who stepped in and saved my life once again? In comes my little sister. So yeah, she stepped in, and actually without my knowledge, sought out, knew actually, obviously she knows more than anyone how much I needed to do this work for the first time, and how overdue it was, and how much I just needed to do it. So she went without my knowledge, because I didn't even have the energy to think of these things or anything. I was just at a point where there was nothing, no lower to go. So she found the place through a friend of hers or a connection, and she actually went through a few of them and found this place in Thailand called The Cabin. And in contact with my mother at the time, and my grandfather and my stepfather, They set it up that they kind of, whatever you call it, kind of like an intervention where I didn't even need, but brought it up to me that, listen, we found this place, we've spoken to them, we've given them a brief outlook on things that's happening, and they seem to really believe that there is something within their program that can be of value to you. And once again, these points in my life where I'm not sure what in me is choosing to take this step rather than saying fuck off. But something in me once again said, okay, like I'll go. I will go from, I was in Bali at the time. I actually had gotten to Bali just a few months before. So that's for context as well. Once again, I spent most of my life in that isolation, being alone and in this space, which I was a bit delusional about. I thought it was safe. I thought I was comfortable. I'm just someone that likes being alone. I like my solitude. I like this and that. It wasn't really the truth behind it, I came to realize. It was more from fear. But then I left Malta, and then literally I had spent a lot of my life thinking about leaving. I wanted to leave. I wanted to travel, I wanted to go somewhere else, and I really felt that, and I had absolutely no awareness of how much it was going to flip everything upside down for me. This speaks upon how many of us are much more drawn and happy sticking to the familiar than taking a step into the unknown. That applies to so many people, and definitely applied to me. Even when it's painful, many of us are much, much more inclined to stick to the familiar. I learned this even when I had gone to Thailand in my own experiences of therapy and stuff. But a lot of us, it's as if in this house made of pain, I know that this is mine. This is familiar to me. It's always something within us knows that this is certain. I have this. Like taking a step, even though it could very likely and almost guaranteed be away from pain into happiness, it's still into the unknown. You still don't know what's coming in as a result of that. And a lot of us fear that greatly because it's out of our control. It takes surrender, it takes letting go, it takes a certain strength and wisdom.
But you took the unknown.
Well, I took the unknown because something in me told me there was nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
So what else is there to lose? It's like, fuck it, I'll go. So literally this happened from the day that I got told, understandably because of the extremity of the intensity of the situation, to literally from the day to a day and a half later, I was on a plane and I flew to Thailand. Beginning this, the place that I went to the program is mainly directed towards people that suffer from addiction. And when you hear the word addiction, yes, most of the time it's with substance addictions, forms of drugs, whatever it may be. Within that program, there's obviously a lot of mental health work, lots of things, everything. There's childhood environment work, all these things. So this is why they also kind of tailored specific therapist to each client depending on story and ability of that therapist and this and that. So it's all very, very well tailored to each client. I got there the first day, beautiful place, amazing, like a enclosed community with all these little cabins, hence the name The Cabin. But something in my mind obviously very quickly started doing what minds tend to do. I'm not meant to be here. I'm not like everyone else. I'm not like them, I'm not a drug addict. I'm trying to make this specialization in my mind that it's a pattern of separating oneself, immediate separation. And having said what I've said over these last few minutes, you can understand where that would come from. It's the isolation within myself immediately. Even just in the thought, like, okay, immediately I'm separate. That's them, they have all their stuff, and this is me, and I'm like almost special, and I'm unique in my shit. So I got there, and from when I got there, it was supposed to be, I think 8 weeks was the plan of the program. And for the first 4 weeks, I was still living out my patterns. I was isolating, at lunchtime I sit alone. Nothing in me went out of the way to connect with anyone or speak to anyone. This was just the way I lived my life, my whole life.
Just as a question, you were disconnected from like the rest of the world, and you also had no phone, right?
Yeah, so they gadgets, tech, all that taken away from you, so you have the ability to really focus on what you need to do. And I actually opted to not even use it at all, but they give the option on Saturdays that you get it for like 2 hours. So, people need to do work emails and contact family and this and that. The therapists and the whole staff and obviously all the people I was living with there, which was about maybe 20 people, from different parts of the world, literally everywhere in the world, suffering with all different kinds of things, whether it's alcoholism or specific substances, whatever it may be. And for the first few weeks, everyone there clearly saw, funnily enough, I somehow managed to be the odd one out in that space too. In that even all those people, they would still, after lunch and everything, they go to the communal area and they're playing board games. They're all there and I'm the only one that goes back to his room. And literally within a couple of days of these people I just met, they knew Josh is the guy that goes back to his room and isolates, and he's just, he's always on his own. They just knew. And then the lack of speaking, and obviously every single day that we woke up in the place, the first thing they start the day with is a sharing circle. So since we were quite a big group, they split it into 2, and you just have a big room of chairs in a circle, and everyone wakes up. They have, they even have feeling wheels, which is a real thing, like some people, a lot of people are so void of having experience of being able to speak what emotions they feel that you need a fucking feeling wheel.
Yeah, maybe because they don't even know.
No, they don't fucking know. I'm telling you, you literally pick up this thing and it's, I'm happy, sad, depressed, suicidal.
Yeah.
They're like, it's good to get you going.
But it's sad, it's like the sad truth.
Of
that
course.
A lot of people, they don't know.
Of course.
What is sadness?
No, yeah, you have no fucking idea.
If they feel tension in the chest, they don't know, this is maybe because I could feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds kind of funny to people like, I'm gonna stare at the, how do you call it?
Feeling wheel. Literally, just like maybe 35 different emotions,
I'm staring.
In green, red, purple,
I'm staring at the feeling wheel.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's super true, and it's a good start, meaning it gives people something to kind of lean on in the beginning. As soon as you kind of met with having spent a whole life not talking about your emotions, and suddenly you're in a circle of people, and they're like, okay, how are you feeling?
Yeah, and someone is like,
holy fucking shit. All right, so they give you this wheel, and it automatically makes you suddenly something. Okay, let's just fucking pick an emotion.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you won't even make it the emotion you're feeling. You just pick one.
Yes.
And most of the time, people will pick the one that says like, "Leave me the fuck alone," or they'll pick the one that's the opposite of what they're really feeling, so no one inquires as to the shit you're going through. So they just say, "I'm fine."
But they become familiar with it at least, like looking at it and being like, "Oh, okay, today I've chosen this one, but." Tomorrow, there is also another emotion.
Absolutely.
Do I resonate with this? So yeah.
No, for sure. And it's all deeply, deeply researched.
Did you had a moment, because you were talking a lot about when you felt that you were still in these old patterns. When was the moment when something cracked open within you? And do you remember the reason? Or maybe it's hard to describe what it was, but do you remember a moment, and when did it happen? What was it? What made you crack open this shell, this mask that you were describing?
Well, it wasn't a moment. I remember a brief period of time where I do recall that something was shifting in me around the point of time. There was also one which is around the point where I do remember something shifted in me, which was childhood environment, which is literally creating what's called a mind map, which is a certain tool they use within this is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And they do mind maps, which is a way of kind of creating a visual example for someone to look at and start spanning out into directions of their past and certain emotions and things. So this one was directed at childhood environment, where you create this mind map that by sections of your years, you begin from when you were born. So you have the first is like 0 to 3, then 3 to 6, and then 6 to 12, and onward until you come up to your current age. And you're literally diving as deep as you can all the way and going into the depths of what you can remember in the specific, like the the most significant events of each of these years within these time frames, and the most painful, and this and that. And obviously, since we were such a big group, they split these exercises into smaller groups. So I shared mine with 3 other guys that I was with there, that I actually grew to be very close with. But obviously, these are heavy, painful spaces that are also very beautiful spaces. But at the time, yes, obviously it was painful. And that was actually what started cracking something open in me, because I wasn't expecting it to be painful. But as I began to go back and recall these things, and memories started to come back that I thought I forgot and I didn't even remember anymore. So then I did mine. And actually at that time, I do remember that I had given a phone call to my mother because I needed some clarity on certain events when I was young, because I didn't remember what the hell happened at this age. So I learned that, and these memories started coming back to me of remembering my mother and how much I loved her, and my relationship with her and how close that was before I lost it. And that gave me back something within myself as well. So this is where I do recall something changing within me. It's a sense of almost beginning to understand. It gave me a kind of a clear vision on where things were really coming from. I started to understand myself for the first time. Why were certain things that I was doing happening, certain patterns and belief systems. And really, I was like, this is the whole point, mind map. You can see it out all in front of you, like, okay, fuck, that happened there, and now this, holy shit, like, it's fucking connected. That's the whole point. Many things, everything changed for me in there.
And how was your time after that? Like, how was the transition, and how did you started to make also this change in the world outside of Thailand? How would you describe the Josh you are today?
Well, I mean, just kind of briefly going back on the Thailand thing, because that's the context that's needed. Like, as I've told you personally, there were so many things that I learned in there, and one of the most beautiful was what we're speaking about here, which is the vulnerability, which is the power I witnessed in people that are prying open their hearts to the darkest spaces of themselves, and seeing suddenly you have a group of people sitting around each other. They don't know each other. They're strangers, basically. And suddenly someone takes that leap to start speaking about the most difficult, painful, traumatizing thing they've ever been through. To them, it feels weak. To them, it feels dark. It feels heavy. It's like a shadow is consuming them as they're saying it. They may be shaking. They may be crying, whatever it is. To everyone else in the room, it's like they radiate light. It's their darkness, as they feel it to them, is coming off as light and is literally shining the light in everyone else. Everyone's starting to feel inspired, like, I can do this. I can speak about mine now. I can do it. And not only that, it's what I started to learn is that vulnerability, taking that step towards it, speaking your heart, is holding up a mirror. That's what we're all doing in these spaces. I started envisioning it like that, like 10 people sitting in a circle, and it's like we're all holding up mirrors, which is our heart. So I found in them the strength that I needed. And this is quite a beautiful example on the concept of shadow work. Most of the time when you cast a shadow, it's cast behind you, which means you need community to help you see your shadow, because you can't really see it yourself most of the time. This is why, and funnily enough, when your shadow is cast and it's being seen by someone else, it's usually seen as light, not shadow, which is the beauty of what I started finding in there. So somehow I'm looking at a person, and we're all relating to the thing this person's saying. It may not be the exact words of my story or the exact context, but it's the same. We started seeing every single one of us is the same. It doesn't matter. He's like cocaine, substance, alcohol, whatever it is. That is the symptom of what we all have the same.
How would you describe yourself today, now, where you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't even know how I would describe myself. What I'm describing now of the past is, as I said in the beginning, it's like talking about a different person. Somehow a strange sense of like I'm carrying these memories of someone that is in me, and you could say is me, but is not as well. I mean, as a result of my experience then, and the spiritual learnings that I went through, and don't like using these overly used terms nowadays, spiritual awakening and all these things. I went through that deeply in ways I can't explain, or how they came to happen. But But that liberated me, and that literally freed me and gave me clarity on life. The things I began to understand, the things I began to see clearly, having gone inward, which is the whole lesson, which I hope the whole world learns, which is that the way out is in. This is why reality is dictated from inside, meaning my inner world is the cause that dictates my outer world, which is the effect. And life at every moment is coming to meet you at exactly where you're meeting it. If I'm meeting it with negativity and fear and self-hate and everything, it's always working in our favor, this existence, life, every moment. No matter how painful, it's still working in your favor in the sense it is meeting you where you're meeting it. So I started to learn and understand that I'm literally dictating, and my reality, not meaning I control people and I control this physical world, but my experience of it is directly correlated through how I perceive it. How am I choosing to look at it? And life immediately meets you like that. If you choose to look for beauty and miracles, it immediately gives you those to look at. Like whatever you're looking for, it brings to you. And I started seeing these things everywhere, even the word miracle. I feel like somewhere down the history lines in humanity, someone took that word and they put it on top of normal.
I love what you said, that it's not really about using the words who you are today. It's about your journey you were going through and what you felt. And something that really stuck with me was something you said, that you will not see the light when you're not in the dark.
Yes, of course. So, the darkness is the light of the light.
Exactly.
It's the space that holds the light.
So we're coming to the last question, and the question is, I wouldn't say practical, but imagine you would talk to someone. Let's say, imagine you would talk to a man who feels numb or maybe empty, but who knows that there is something within me that wants to be heard. What would you say to this person? Even what would you have wished that maybe someone else would have said to you?
Well, in my experience, a lot of people did say many things to me, but I forgot what the saying is. I wasn't able to understand what I was hearing. Meaning, this is when it comes to knowledge, things you're being told and shared with. If it's not your time to understand what's being said, you won't hear anything. At a different point in time, I may hear the same sentence and it could change my whole life. So this is why I believe I was on my exact timeline, and that I was only ready to have this change at exactly the time that was needed. The whole topic of the men and males, it's simply coming to a self-realization that once again, so many of us are stuck in this pursuit towards something that we think is going to give us this, but getting this is actually in the opposite direction. In the sense, like it's the paradox of life is usually, once again, like out in. It's feeling like hiding your emotions is power, is taking you away from your power. Also came to the realization that I developed this refusal to be what I always was. Meaning, there's a saying that knowledge is a treasure, but practice is the key to it. Meaning, knowledge can either be the tool of your empowerment or your imprisonment.
So where can someone start?
It all starts from self-awareness. I have to say, like, that's the one thing that's stuck with me, and that's where it has to start from, because you can't make a change if you don't know anything has to be changed. I think there's a saying, real change comes when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of making a change. Because making a change is painful. Because your body, your mind, your patterns, everything will work in direct conflict with the change you're trying to make. And it's actually it's a survival mechanism. It's trying to protect you by keeping you in the same, by what it knows. Even the body wants to stay in the known than the unknown. So I learned that actually in my time in Thailand, where I started refusing, and I started realizing I had the ability to rewrite my own beliefs and my own thoughts and outlook on myself, which is what changes everything. So even right now, sitting in a room, being recorded and talking into a microphone, I feel my body having some form of anxiety, but I'm able to think beyond the way that my body feels and choose. That's where it lies. Once you become aware of the change that needs to be made, then you have to choose to make it. And if you don't choose to make it, then you're still making a choice, and that's going to point you back towards the same. And you're going to have the same repeated cycle. And it's all about perspective. The way that you look at things will dictate what you're seeing. And it starts from self. It's a choice. So I learned, like, I'm simply choosing by not choosing, and I'm staying in the same, and I'm sitting in this victimization, which so many people do. So I had to liberate myself from that, because no one is ever going to come and do that for us. If we don't do it for ourselves, because we care and love about our own being, it's never going to change. And everything started changing for me then, like the synchronicities, the understandings of everything, on the polarities of life, and once again, the paradoxes of thinking you get that by... It's not the way it works. Meaning even this pursuit we all have to try and get things from the outside world, where there'd be money, relationship, house, this fulfillment to try and fill this thing we all have, and it's never fulfilled. It's spoken about by countless people, famous people, rich people, whatever it may be, and it's never fulfilled because it has to begin there. It's actually the way that reality works is inverted to what we're taught. You have to embody the state of who you want to become before you even get there. Don't be afraid of your darkness, because that is the exact path that leads you to the light. And then you come to realize that it is all perspective. Because once you get to the light, then you realize, if I couldn't have gotten to the light without the dark, then isn't the dark light? And that is the saying, and even in Egyptian philosophy, the purpose in being for humanity is transmutation from darkness to light. And that's the same thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I could talk so much longer with you.
Yeah, I know, 10 hours, let's go.
Same as we did last time. Yeah. But no, really, I am truly grateful that we met.
Oh, thank you so much.
You were opening up about your whole story. It's just so amazing to see you in front of me talking about this with this curiosity, with this courage, with this spark in your eyes, even though you say, hey, I even feel anxious sometimes. I even have these thoughts. So thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing your story with the world. And we're coming to an end of the episode, and I want to thank each and every one of you who stayed until the end, who listened until here. And please, 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 if you have anyone in mind who should listen to exactly this episode, then please share this episode with this person. You have no idea how much meaning such words could have to a person that needs to hear exactly this. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube or on the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, to not miss out any further episodes. I'm gonna put Josh's Instagram down below so you can also start to connect with him. And if you have any further questions or any thoughts you want to share, please feel free to write something in the comment box down below. Don't forget to rate the podcast if you liked the episode. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day or have a good night, and see you on the next Wednesday. Bye.